Okay, part 3. This one's going to be a bit heavier. The amount of things that I went through are, some of it's very, very hard to hear, and I'm not going to censor any of it. So, the things that have gone on, I believe I was 6 years old when shit started actually happening, for the most part. I would say 5 when my mom and my dad split, but for the most part 6. Even before I was born, there were jealous eyes on me for my even my existence. Unfortunately, the family that I was raised in, there was a lot of that. No happiness for each other, no encouragement, no support, just everybody fucking in competition with each other. It's whatever. Anyways, I understand that that is something that is taught, but at a certain point, you know, when you're fucking doing something that you shouldn't. But a lot of death spells and shit like that. Very first thing that happened to me when I was born, my doctor purposefully pushed down on me as he was delivering me, and he almost snapped my neck. He broke my collarbone so that he could take me out of my mom. And that was the very first thing. Very first thing. And it's very interesting how collarbone, why they call it a collar. They call it a collar. You put collars around pets, do you not? Anyways, so my doctor snapped my collarbone. That's the first thing that happened when I was born. And then at 5, my parents split. I'm going to try to make this easy. And then my parents split, and then I watched both my parents, you know, I'm empathetic, so I picked up energies on both my parents. Any negative energy you could possibly think of that a splitting, divorced couple would go through, I picked that up as a 5-year-old. And my brother came along when I was 5 as well. I would have been 4. How am I so confused right now? He's 2 years younger than me, for fuck's sakes. Anyways, so I watched them go through that, and I watched all the tears. I think one of the first things I ever did was wipe away the tears from my mother's face. And so that sort of empathy for another person, wanting to make things better, not understanding what the fuck's going on, that was one of the first things I learned as a child. Also, one thing that strikes me, this whole cookie crumble thing, I could just picture myself at the cottage, and my nonna gave me a cookie, right? And she gave it to me, and I'm just like, that's all in pieces. She's like, oh, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And then I was like, okay. And I was like, that must have been the first time I understood what acceptance was. But I was like, I don't know if that actually applies to me. But anyways, different things that come up. So yeah, I watched them both fall apart. My mother met my stepfather when I was around the age of 6. I'm not too 100% sure of what all transpired around the age. I know I was exposed to certain things. I even got a download that maybe my very first burlesque show, and my mom and stepfather have no problem. They're almost like swingers, right? They have no problem showing their bodies to their own children and stuff like that, walk around naked, whatever, you name it. Growing up, you know, some families or people would think that's weird, and I was just used to seeing that stuff. And whatever, that aside, I'm not too concerned about that. But then when it came to sexualizing certain things, I remember my brother got some surgery. He was circumcised at a late age, okay? And I'm sorry, bro, but I gotta mention this. No names, but he was circumcised at a late age. So that excruciating amount of pain that my mom put him through, I don't know, because normally I think they do that when they're children, like born, firstborn, right? They don't remember none of that shit. But so I remember him coming home, and he had to. He did explain this to me once, the amount of pain he suffered through the healing process, right? I can't even imagine. Like the description he gave me, just like that kid. I'm so sorry he went through that, but my mom decided to put him through that, and that was part of his trauma too. But I just remember him being on the couch there, and I guess she had to not change him, but like just help him with gauze or whatever. And I remember this one time, she had me come over, and she was pointing at it, say, look, it moves and stuff like that. Like, okay, so that in itself, right? That's a small thing too. And I'm not too worried about that. That's like the least of it. And then you have my stepbrother, who is my stepfather's son. My stepfather had 2 sons before he even met my mom. One of them, I believe, was sacrificed at the age of 2. And when I say sacrificed, I mean they said he had cradle death. He just stopped breathing. But something my stepfather refused to talk about in the downloads I got. I'm not even going to get into detail about that sort of thing, but he never talked about it, and it was very upsetting. And he never, in the amount of years I've known that individual, never admitted or talked about it or anything like that. But there's obviously a heavy amount of guilt that he carries with it. So he still had his remaining son, and my stepbrother, around the age of 6, I started to I take self-accountability as well. As a 6-year-old, I'm thinking, okay, well, my mother, rejected the fact that when people gave me any sort of praise or something, she would make me feel like shit for it. And because she was jealous. So she would make sure it was known to me. And that's a part of where it comes in, where I don't feel like I deserve certain things at all. And that I'm worth less than a bag of garbage. But so I seek any kind of attention, and physically things started to develop between my stepbrother and I, and nothing actually happened for the longest time. But this carried on for years till we moved to a new place, and it's still all of us. And so in the house, it was my mother, who was like a tomboy, my stepfather, my step-grandfather, my stepbrother, and my little brother. Okay, and I was the only like actual feminine energy carried in that house. I will say that there was a lot of shit. I remember, because I was, this is when my mom and stepfather got married. I think there was some big fight to do about the house, because my stepfather has a sibling, right? An actual biological child to his adoptive parents, because he was adopted. And there was this huge thing, because he was older when I guess they fought over the house that my brother, my mom, and I had moved into, and there was a huge fight and so I just remember going down the stairs. I'm very young, and I just remember seeing like blood all over the carpet, and they were fighting, and then they look up and they tell me to go the F back upstairs. And so I was exposed to a lot of violence and shit like that. And then when I was this one I struggle with, because I can't remember the exact age, but basically I lost my virginity to my stepbrother. And he didn't have any guidance either. Neither did I. And when asking my mom, she said, "Oh, you already knew what it was, right?" Because I asked her, "Why didn't you ever explain to me the birds and the bees or talk to me about any of that?" And then when I also, my little brother is the one that went and said something, and he had it stopped. Like, he actually like didn't give them a choice but to do something about it, right? Because he's like a witness. And I asked my mom, "Well, if you've experienced this sort of thing in your past," because she's had like similar, if not worse, stuff happen to her. It's like, "Why didn't you stop it if you knew the red flags?" She's like, "Well, I didn't have any proof." And I was like, that just to me tells me that she was codependent on my stepfather in order to be a provider. So she didn't want to, put anything at risk. She didn't want to jeopardize anything for herself when it comes to stability. So she would rather subject her daughter to something she similarly went to because she survived through it. So why shouldn't I, right? And that level of detachment there, I asked her at one time too. I was like, "What would happen if I died tomorrow?" This was recently in my 30s. I said, "What would happen if I died tomorrow?" She said, "What do you want done with your body?" And I was like, okay, well, that's a level of detachment there. She's been so damaged that her and my stepfather both have been so damaged that they have refused to come back from that. And their ego has gotten in the way, and they seem to project onto everybody else instead of taking their own self-accountability for everything that transpired. I do think they tried to get me to go to a therapist or whatever, and that only lasted one session. My brother talked, and then when it came to me, I was so scared I didn't talk. And I just remember getting in the truck, and she was like, "Oh, so and so, my brother's name, I'm so proud of you." And she looked at me and she's like, "You're so cooperative, so and so, unlike your sister." And then we never went to another session. I was like, "Well, that's really fucked." But go back to the whole losing my virginity there. I remember my stepbrother being on top of me, and I said, "Oh, it hurt," right? And he's like, "It's supposed to." And he, being a child as well, like I think he's only a few years older than me, but for him to think that that's okay, right? He obviously had the idea in his head at some point, but the whole idea of the grooming the children and allowing them to go through the same thing, the same cycles, and nothing is learned and it's repeated. Those energies are repeated, maybe in different scenarios, but those energies are repeated. And then I do remember going to, I think I had to get a PAB or something like that at a very young age. I think a second PAB was at 13, but before that, I don't know if I lost it at 10, 11, thinking maybe 10. Anyway, so yeah, I go to the doctors, and my doctor told my mom that I was fine, because I guess you can tell whether or not there's been any trauma or anything like that down there. And he said, my mother told me that the doctor said that you weren't penetrated. Nothing happened to you. So my entire life I grew up with her telling me that nothing happened, and we were not allowed to talk about it. Anything that transpired, we were not allowed to discuss it with the family. I wasn't allowed to discuss it with anybody else. Mind you, there was only one session that really happened. She wasn't too happy about it. Didn't go the way she wanted, so she discontinued that. None of them tried to speak to us, and unfortunately a lot of the blame was placed on my stepbrother because he was the older one. And then they ridiculed him. They sent him away after a certain period of time. When he got to a certain age, he disowned the family, and I don't blame him at all. I don't blame him at all. I'll tell you that much. Because the one time I even said to my mom on the beach, she was drinking, I said, "You know what? If anything, he's better off, right? He's just no bets at all." I said, "He's probably doing way better." And nothing. All she could say is, "You fucking bitch." This was, I think this was my birthday. But yeah, a lot of mean shit's been said by my mother, and I've already come to terms with this. The only reason I am divulging this is to help other people that have been through this shit. I'm not fucking ashamed. I'm not afraid. I'm gonna say some shit because some cult shit has been going on, and turns out this expands further because my stepfather is his father was a I believe, a 33rd degree Mason, my step-grandpa. And then same with his son, and then same with my stepdad. And they were all part of the Masonry. And I believe my stepfather's backed out or something like that because he owed them money, or I don't know. But some shady shit, man. My grandfather, when he passed away, again, remember that whole fight that transpired during my parents' marriage? Well, my grandfather miraculously just dropped dead in the Bank of Montreal, I believe it was. He had an aneurysm or something like that. That was a little suspicious, but if you know anything about energies and manipulation, what you can send to people, you can actually wish ill or death on somebody. And if they're not protected or they don't have their own, we'll say, waves high enough, you know, that shit can kill a person. I think I tried to hang myself at the age of 11, I believe. I think maybe even earlier. But that sort of negative energy that was projected onto me because I'm empathic, I picked up on that. No child should feel like they need to end their life, especially that early or at any time at all. And through several times in my life, I experienced that sort of depression stuff, and just the amount of weight that I carried, the amount of projections I carried as well when it came to pedophilia and stuff like that, and the mixed emotions I had about that because everything I experienced, and that's only a part of some of the stuff I discussed. Like I've had lots of other things happen to me in situations where I was a sacrifice because I didn't know better and because I was under huge brainwashing and a huge amount of spell work. And there were even friends of mine that betrayed me to subject me and be a sacrifice for them to gain some benefit off me or whatever. But yeah, so the more I started to learn in the past year or so, even before then, I was getting downloads, what I call downloads, intuitive messages and stuff like that. I just knew things before I even asked. Like I knew my stepfather and his traumas, what he went through, and same with my mom. And it's almost like I could see certain things beforehand, and I didn't even, I asked them about it, and they just kind of confirmed it for me, and like they never did any of their healing. So all that shit that they didn't heal, they projected onto myself, my little brother, my stepbrother, you name it, anybody around them. They're fully aware of what they do, even when confronted. I have tried to get them to go on their own journey. They don't want to. There's other family members, like I said before. I've pretty much cut everybody off in my life because they decided that they don't want to do that sort of work. They told me to keep, specifically on my mom's side, to keep my fucking mouth shut, some of them said. They do not want to talk about shit, but they don't want me to talk about shit either. And coming up close to 1920, I'm going to have to cut this short, but up to this very point in my life, I have managed to escape, and I am still fighting the best I can through all the attacks. And like I said, before the 6th, do your work. Cut those cords. Whatever you need to do to protect yourself. Whatever you need to do to protect yourself right now. It's crucial. Am I going to put another video? Probably not. I don't know. We'll see. But I still carry my own sunshine.